For drone aerial photography, the famous Hawaiian Islands are 132 islands and are the only archipelago state in the United States, with its capital in Honolulu on the island of Oahu. However, the filming location of the crew of Shark Beach is not on Oahu, but on Kauai, which is also the filming location set for Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is still in preparation, but Shark Beach has begun filming. The whole story of Shark Beach seems very simple. It is the story of a girl who comes to surf on a remote beach, encounters a shark, and escapes. For little Gilbert, how to shoot the shark's mouth escape well is the key to the success of the film. Fortunately, with the reference of the original Shark Beach, little Gilbert can also know how to shoot the desired effect. Little Gilbert, come and play, it's so fun here. Gwyneth Paltrow in a sexy bikini playing in the sea. On the beaches of Hawaii in July, the waters are turquoise, and seagulls are constantly roaming and chirping in the distance. The waves gently caress the reefs on both sides of the beach, creating a crash. The sun, the Shark Beach, the coconut trees, the beauties, the bikini, the elements. But little Gilbert didn't come to enjoy it. He waved his hand and said, "Rest for a while. Aren't you tired of filming so many scenes?" "I'm not tired. I'm going to surf again." With that, Gwyneth Paltrow paddled her surfboard and rushed into the sea again. "Hey, there are sharks in the sea. You have to be careful." Little Gilbert shouted. "I'm playing a shark escaping from the mouth, whining." Gwyneth Paltrow was completely hilarious. Well, for others, Shark Beach is work, but for Gwyneth Paltrow, it's a vacation. Although he has experience directing big online movies in his previous life, it is unknown how much of that experience can work in Hollywood crews in the 90s. As a result, Gilbert Jr. adopted a step-by-step approach, starting with simple scenes and gradually increasing the difficulty. Is also because of the small investment in this movie. The size of its crew is not much larger than the network crew he was in charge of in his previous life, which makes little Gilbert feel at ease. When the first shot was shot, little Gilbert was still a little nervous, and there was a slight mistake. But fortunately, it quickly adjusted, and then quickly got into the groove. No one in the crew laughed at him. After all, he became a director at the age of 21 and was in charge of the crew, so it is understandable that he was a little rushed. On the contrary, Gilbert Jr. quickly entered the state and showed good professional qualities, which surprised many people. Director of photography Dur Randolph whispered to little Gilbert in a private conversation, "I really didn't expect that you would be 10 years younger than me and be able to get into work so quickly, which is really amazing." Little Gilbert said modestly, "It is everyone's cooperation and support that I can successfully find the feeling." Dur Randolph looked at little Gilbert and said seriously, "For us, it's just a job, little Gilbert. But for you, it means a lot." Little Giberton nodded his head to show that he understood. After a week of running in, the crew gradually got better, and the shooting was no longer jerky at the beginning and began to go smoothly. "Are you ready?" "Director, it's ready." "Okay, the remote control drone takes off. Take a picture to see the effect. I want a panoramic view of the beach." Little Gilbert commanded. "Okay." The drone operator made an okay gesture and quickly steered the drone to take off. The front of the drone is equipped with a camera that can rotate 360 degrees, which is produced by Sony, and the captured images are transmitted to the monitor through the signal. Looking at the picture effect from the monitor, the crowd around the monitor was amazed. This is the first time they have seen drones used for filmmaking. Gwyneth Paltrow excitedly patted little Gilbert on the back and said, "Little Gilbert, I'm going to play this. It's not for you to play with such expensive equipment. Hurry up and finish shooting. We have to return the equipment." Little Gilbert decisively refused. Dur Randolph has been working in cinematography for 7 or 8 years, and this is the first time he has seen such a shooting technique. He asked little Gilbert curiously, "Director, how did you come up with the idea of using a drone to shoot this picture?" It's not my original, Gilbert Jr. explains. 2 years ago, the Belgian Previna made a film shoot with a drone. At present, the company he founded has a high level of drone shooting technology and practice, but his company has not opened in the United States, so we can only modify it ourselves. Der Randolph exclaimed, "Director, even so, you are a genius. Who would have thought of shooting a movie in this way?" "Yes," Gwyneth Paltrow chimed in. "I thought you went to Honolulu to find a drone to use it to kill sharks, but I didn't expect it to be for aerial photography." Just this drone shooting, so that many people in the crew put away their inner contempt for little Gilbert. This young man really has some skills in hand. In fact, drone technology has been used in the military field since the beginning and has developed rapidly. With the popularity of the civilian market, the performance of civilian drones is becoming more and more powerful, but there are still few full-time aerial photography drones. The drone was found by Gilbert Jr., who took someone to Honolulu, and the Sony camera was airlifted from Los Angeles, and then retrofitted and modified. Of course, because it costs a lot to buy directly. In fact, this drone was modified with the consent of the owner of the model airplane. Similarly, the owner of the model airplane shop also followed to the set and witnessed the whole process of the crew filming with a drone, and then was dumbfounded. He didn't think that drones could still play like this. Drone photography, which has been played around in the 21st century, was a novelty in the early 90s. Although there is a lot of gap between drone technology and aerial photography technology in 20 or 30 years, it is enough to make these soil buns drop their jaws in this era. When the drone came back and landed safely, little Gilbert smiled and said to the owner of the model airplane, "How is it?" "I didn't lie to you. The development prospects of drone aerial photography technology are really good. You can do it." The owner of the model airplane shop took back his drone in a daze, watched the crew dismantle the camera made by Sony, and asked, "How much does this camera cost? Shouldn't it be expensive, right?" Little Gilbert looked at Der Randolph. Randolph replied, "It's not expensive, but Hawaii doesn't, and you're going to go to Los Angeles to buy it." The owner of the model airplane shop excitedly took back his drone and began to think about how to use the technology of drone aerial photography to make a fortune. This scene by Gilbert Jr. may lay the foundation for future drone companies. At the end of today's filming day, when they returned to the hotel to rest, Gilbert Jr. and Der Randolph continued to ride in a car and exchange ideas with each other. Technically, drone aerial photography makes up for the lack of low and medium-altitude photography. Helicopters can only function at an altitude of more than 500 meters, while ground machinery such as rocker arms, slide rails, and Steadicam are only 20 meters high. However, UAVs can fill the space field of 20 meters to 500 meters well, and with the continuous revolution of photography technology, UAV shooting will replace helicopter shooting in the future and become a new aerial photography mode. Gilbert Jr. describes to Der Randolph the bright future of drone aerial photography. Der Randolph agrees. "I feel, director, that you have led a technological revolution in the way of cinematography, and you will be remembered in the history of cinema." Little Gilbert waved his hand and said, "This method is not my original. I pay more attention to how to make the movie in front of me than to go down in history. After this time, I don't know why, I'm sure you'll succeed." Der Randolph gained confidence in Gilbert Jr. "I need your help, Der." "Of course, I'm a professional photographer," says Der Randolph confidently. "Gwen, your breasts, stand up. They are so deflated that you can't even see them," little Gilbert shouted to Gwyneth Paltrow, who was showing off her figure on the reef. "You don't have breasts." Gwyneth Paltrow was annoyed and couldn't help but puff up her chest. Now that he has a chest, little Gilbert hurriedly beckoned the photographer to shoot. "Okay, keep it this way, camera. Give a close-up of the chest up close. Focus on the groove in the middle." Hearing this, Photographer Der Randolph looked strange and thought that he was filming in the San Fernando Valley. Gwyneth Paltrow, lying on a reef in the middle of the sea, struck a graceful pose, and although her breasts were not visible, her long, slender legs were more than enough to make up for it. But now her long leg had just been rubbed by a shark, and a long cut was made, and she was bleeding. Of course, this is a masterpiece of industrial light and magic special effects models, and they have deep research in the field of wound creation. In advance, he simulated the angle of the shark to take a bite to cause the wound, and then put a wound bag on Gwyneth Paltrow's leg. Because the sky was dark when shooting and the light was deliberately adjusted to hit the angle, even if you shoot with the camera up close, you can't see the flaws. It was on this reef that Gwyneth Paltrow needed to stop the bleeding and close the wound. The script sets her up as a medical student, and these necessary first aid measures naturally have to be shown. Before filming, Gwyneth Paltrow deliberately went to a local hospital in Honolulu to practice and practiced against dummies for a long time. I have to say that although this girl is rebellious, her temper is not bad, and she has some princess diseases, her professionalism is much stronger than that of the little flowers 30 years later. Because of the investigation of the location of Jurassic Park, Spielberg also came to Kauai, Hawaii, and stopped by to see the crew of Shark Beach. After all, he still has the title of producer. After watching Little Gilbert skillfully direct a few scenes, Spielberg was a lot more relieved. At least Little Gilbert proved that he had the ability to direct. Without break, Gwyneth Paltrow, who had changed into casual summer shorts, ran barefoot. Godfather. Little Gwen. How is the filming going during this time? Spielberg is still quite fond of his goddaughter and cares about her condition. Very good, said Gwyneth Paltrow. The film is so much fun. You can surf, you can play in the sand, you can sunbathe. Ha ha ha, you girl. Making movies is not for you to enjoy. Of course I know, so I'm very serious when I'm filming. I don't believe you ask Little Gilbert. Gwyneth Paltrow tilted her head and said arrogantly. Little Gilbert echoed. Indeed, Gwen is quite serious when filming, but sometimes she is naughty and funny. Whoever is naughty and funny, you tell me clearly. Gwyneth Paltrow chased after Little Gilbert and was about to hammer him. Spielberg watched the two young people play with a deep smile and felt that he was also a lot younger. The sun, the beach, the coconut trees, the sea breeze blowing, and the filming is indeed a pleasure. However, Little Gilbert was still able to take the shooting seriously, much to Spielberg's surprise. In the afternoon, Spielberg continued to follow the crew to the set to see the scenes that Gilbert Jr. filmed in the afternoon. Before the start of filming, Little Gilbert also specially told the life producer, "Hell, find someone to clean up the garbage and take it out when the time comes. I don't want to go back and be blocked by environmental protection organizations to protest." The life producer said that he received, "Okay, director, I'll immediately find someone to pick up the garbage." On set, Gwyneth Paltrow changed into a sexy surfing costume and swam in the sea. Photographer Der Randolph followed her with a camera and shot the first shot. This shot behind him because it is handheld and it is deliberately shaking, so it is a shaky lens from the perspective of framing, as if a shark is chasing the heroine. Spielberg and Little Gilbert watched the real-time footage of this handheld camera from the monitor and found it very interesting. "This is the Predator shot you were talking about?" Spielberg asked. Little Gilbert nodded and explained, "Actually, similar shooting techniques have been used for a long time. When Hitchcock filmed Rear Window, he used a kind of shooting technique from God's perspective, which makes people feel desperate and depressed, which can be regarded as the initial version of similar shooting techniques. Didn't you use a similar shooting technique in Jaws?" Spielberg shook his head and said, "At that time, due to technical limitations, it was not possible to achieve the same level as it is now, and the visual impact was not strong enough. I've seen your shooting technique, And you're definitely good at creating a tense and exciting atmosphere, and you've done a pretty good job. Thank you for the compliment, Uncle Stephen. Little Gilbert was happy to be recognized by Spielberg. In between filming, Gilbert Jr. also fully exchanged his thoughts with Spielberg and also asked the top director various questions. Spielberg was also happy to bring in his younger generation, and despite the constraints of his time, he still benefited Gilbert Jr. a lot from his answers. For a film, the shots, the editing, the soundtrack, the acting are all important parts of the organic system of the film, and the same is true for thriller horror movies. Gilbert Jr. pitches to Spielberg about his idea of making Shark Beach. Generally speaking, horror movies are divided into two genres. One is to use horror sound effects and special effects, makeup to achieve scary purposes, and Japanese horror films have a high level of attainment in this area. The other is to create a tense and exciting horror atmosphere through superb camera movement and editing, just like this Shark Beach. I tend to the latter, and the films made in this way also have a very high-end feeling, and small-budget films can also have a texture that is not lost to blockbusters. In the face of little Gilbert's incessant talk, Spielberg seemed to see through him completely and said with a smile, "You want me to support you in the filmmaking and editing process?" Gilbert Jr., who was seen through, was not embarrassed and said bluntly, "Editing is no less important to a movie than any link. Having two people edit a finished film can present two completely different films. I'm the creator of the film, and I know exactly what the film should look like in the end. Of course, I'm not saying that you have to get the final editing rights, but I just hope that when editing, you should refer to my opinion." After saying that, little Gilbert looked at Spielberg very worriedly because he knew that he was asking too much. As a rookie director, he is completely unqualified to get his hands on the final editing rights, which is a matter for film companies and top directors. But little Gilbert also doesn't want the film he worked so hard to shoot to end up ruining the editing. Spielberg pondered for a moment before agreeing, "Okay, little Gilbert, I'll talk to Universal Pictures about what you think, and as long as it's not too excessive, they'll take your advice." Little Gilbert was overjoyed and hurriedly thanked. "Thank you, Uncle Stephen." "You're welcome, little Gilbert." Spielberg patted little Gilbert on the shoulder and said again, "Hollywood can't tolerate people who fail the first time, and if you want to make a name for yourself in this circle, the first step is the most important." "I understand, Uncle Stephen." Gilbert Jr. was impressed by Spielberg's words. Spielberg left in the evening, and he still had a lot of work to do, and it was extremely rare to find time to visit Shark Beach. And little Gilbert, who has been recognized by Spielberg, is becoming more and more confident, and he is more comfortable in shooting films. During the filming on the island of Kauai, Hawaii, although Gwyneth Paltrow, as the heroine, had her own separate hotel room, the girl still preferred to sleep in the same room with little Gilbert. The crew was not surprised by this. After all, if it weren't for Gwyneth Paltrow, their little directors would have been choked enough to get the opportunity to direct so early. The fact that the director and the actress have slept is still quite common in Hollywood, especially in the independent film industry. And Hollywood bigwigs have special hobbies. Maybe you think it's one man and one woman, and it's not impossible for people to be two men, or two women, or three or four. Comparatively speaking, the independent film industry is more chaotic, while the mainstream film industry is more formal. At the very least, by sleeping, you can sleep with a leading role in the independent film industry, but this trick does not work in the mainstream film industry, or it does not work much. But for Gilbert Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow, the situation is very different and not quite the same. Gwyneth Paltrow called her relationship with little Gilbert a temporary partnership, admitting only that she was infatuated with little Gilbert's flesh and did not like him as a person. For a while, little Gilbert still felt that he was playing a hooligan, according to the traditional concept of the country on the other side of the Pacific. Since he was in someone's house, he had to have an explanation. But later, Gwyneth Paltrow looked indifferent, and little Gilbert was temporarily relieved of his psychological burden. Even in the country on the other side of the Pacific, 20 or 30 years later, young people's attitudes about life have changed dramatically. There are also a lot of relationships similar to temporary partners, and there is a more appropriate name, called canon*friend. However, this temporary partnership came to an end with the arrival of Gwyneth Paltrow's father, Mr. Paltrow. Mr. Paltrow is a very traditional and conservative person, and he hates the so-called free culture of men and women, and naturally forbids his daughter to at will. The night before Mr. Paltrow arrived, Gwyneth Paltrow worked hard with little Gilbert until she was so exhausted that she couldn't move her fingers. When she returned to her hotel room the next day, Gwyneth Paltrow left her sexy pajamas for little Gilbert as a souvenir. "Little Gilbert, my father looked at me this time, and I guess I will be arrested by him after filming." Gwyneth Paltrow looked at little Gilbert with teary eyes. "Little Gilbert can't say anything. Can I go and tell your father to let him set you free?" According to Gwyneth Paltrow, it is very likely that Gilbert Jr. will be sued by Mr. Paltrow for indecent assault. At that time, even if you can't be convicted, you will be in a commotion. That's it. It's very frustrating. Sighing, little Gilbert opened his arms. "Then it's okay for us to hug, right?" Gwyneth Paltrow burst into tears and laughed. "Of course you can." The two hugged each other and made one last gesture of exchanging air. Gwyneth Paltrow was not satisfied and whispered into little Gilbert's ear, "Don't worry, I will find a chance to escape. I can't forget the joy you brought me." Okay, listen to your father. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's go. Your father will be there in a while." Little Gilbert patted Gwyneth Paltrow on the ass and sent her out of the room. "Then I'm gone without my knight. You remember to miss me." Gwyneth Paltrow followed suit, and with great reluctance, she eventually returned to her room. Little Gilbert, who had returned to the bed, stared blankly at the chandelier on the ceiling, thinking wildly. To be honest, in the past few years in North America, little Gilbert feels that his outlook on life has changed significantly. I can't tell if it has changed for the better or worse, but it can only be said that it is more suitable for the social environment in North America. In the afternoon, little Gilbert met Gwyneth Paltrow's rigid father. Mr. Paltrow looked at him a little like a prisoner, which made little Gilbert a little nervous. However, it is possible that Gwyneth Paltrow was tight-lipped and did not let Mr. Paltrow catch the evidence, so little Gilbert escaped Mr. Paltrow's eyes. However, just like stealing, there will only be 0 and countless times. In between a day's shooting, while Mr. Paltrow was hanging out in Honolulu, Gwyneth Paltrow took little Gilbert to hide in a remote place. "I said, what are you pulling me here?" Little Gilbert is still weird. As a result, I didn't expect Gwyneth Paltrow to come up and start picking up clothes directly and said anxiously, "Hurry up, my father won't have time to come back in the afternoon." Little Gilbert was speechless for a moment. It turned out that he pulled himself over just for this? This broad daylight in the wild, That's embarrassing, isn't it? Gwyneth Paltrow couldn't care so much, so she just took off little Gilbert's clothes, squatted down, and began to practice yoga. This kind of scene, which can only be seen in various indescribable films, is really staged at this moment. The most important thing is that on the road outside, there are cars and pedestrians passing by from time to time, and the small trees can't stop the spring light at all. As soon as someone notices this side, the two will be spotted. Probably because of this thrill, today's yoga experience is special and fast. After yoga, Gwyneth Paltrow wiped her mouth and told little Gilbert, "Go back and don't show your flaws. Don't be discovered." With that, he walked away with his long legs, leaving little Gilbert messy in the wind. In the following days, Gwyneth Paltrow looked for similar opportunities from time to spend Spring Festival with little Gilbert, although it was summer. Every time little Gilbert was afraid that Mr. Paltrow would kill him and find out what the two were doing, but he had to admit that it was quite exciting and addictive. May also be because of this tense and exciting action, Gwyneth Paltrow found more and more feeling, and her performance became better and better in the subsequent acting. This kind of intense and exciting days did not end until the filming of Shark Beach ended and Gwyneth Paltrow followed Mr. Paltrow back to Los Angeles. Although it was refreshing, little Gilbert remained sober in the midst of passion. He knows very well what the foundation of everything he is. It is a director's career, and if he doesn't do this well, then everything will be far away from him. The end result is nothing more than to be reduced to the point of coming to the bar girl to solve it like old Gilbert. If you don't talk about feelings, that's another matter. After all, American girls don't mean to talk to him about feelings. But little Gilbert didn't want to give his noble body to the bar girl, and that would be a loss. By the way, it's not that little Gilbert thinks his body is noble, it's Gwyneth Paltrow who said it. After all, he inherited the genes of old Gilbert, and his physical fitness is still quite strong in all aspects. After finishing filming in Hawaii, after a simple dinner of American fried chicken, Gilbert Jr. announced the disbandment of the crew. He then returned to Los Angeles with the finished film and plunged headfirst into post-editing. Universal Pictures followed Spielberg's advice and involved Gilbert Jr. in the post-editing process, allowing Gilbert Jr. to stay on top of the post-production of his film. In addition to his involvement in editing, Gilbert Jr. also paid attention to the shark effect created by ILM. The special effects technology of this era is still much worse than 20 or 30 years later, but the technology of industrial light and magic is already the top. In the eyes of little Gilbert, it was just like that, but in the eyes of producer Domer Blake, the image of the shark was vivid enough and terrifying enough. Throughout the film, little Gilbert uses super high camera movement techniques to replace a large number of sharks from a subjective perspective, so there are not many scenes of sharks appearing in the whole film. If there were sharks in the whole film, the production cost of $3.5 million would certainly not be enough. In fact, this is also a subtraction of the original film in order to reduce and compress the production cost as much as possible. Little Gilbert does the same thing as the original to produce the best results at the right production cost. However, the actual effect of the film depends on what the finished film looks like at the end. For the finished film, little Gilbert has a clear picture in his mind. So in post-production, Gilbert Jr. tried his best to control the pace and let the film be produced in the direction he expected. However, doing so is tantamount to robbing the editor of power, so it is inevitable that some disagreements and disputes will occur. This shot is shorter and used to create a tense and exciting atmosphere of horror. It's not good. It should be stretched a little longer so that we can see the beautiful figure of the heroine. In the editing room, Gilbert Jr. again gets into an argument with editor Paul Collins. Similar disputes have occurred many times between the two in recent times. Paul Collins is Universal's own man, and his ability to edit the film is undoubtedly more reassuring to Universal. At first, Gilbert Jr. only made some suggestions and had no idea of arguing with Paul Collins. But seeing that Paul Collins's editing direction gradually deviated from the main line, focusing on Gwyneth Paltrow's beautiful figure, thus ignoring the most important theme of the film, little Gilbert finally couldn't help it. Your editing is not in the right direction. Our film is about how to escape from the shark's mouth, and sharp editing is very important. If you want to watch an romance movie, why don't you go to the San Fernando Valley clip? Little Gilbert asked loudly. Paul Collins said nonchalantly, "Young man, you only have the right to suggest. As for how to edit it, that's my business." It's true that editing is a thing, but you're destroying a wonderful movie, and I can't tolerate your behavior. Then you can report it, Paul Collins said. Your behavior has crossed the line. You see who the company will listen to. In Hollywood, It's true that new directors are not qualified to dictate editing rights, and it would be nice to have a suggestion. As for whether to listen to it or not, it's someone else's business, and it's not the turn of the rookie director to care. But if Gilbert Jr. is older, has experienced the ups and downs of the industry, and has a certain prestige, the editor can still listen to his opinion to a certain extent. But the problem is that little Gilbert is only 21 years old, and his work experience is only as an executive director in Captain Hook. Young, with no qualifications and no experience, it is easy to be despised by others. I didn't think it was filming at the time, but when it came to the post-editing and production process, the editor's important position undoubtedly had a much greater right to speak, and he was able to keep little Gilbert out of the editing work by virtue of his identity. Paul Collins is that no matter what Gilbert Jr. suggests, he doesn't listen to it, and he cuts exactly what he wants. So the film becomes Gwyneth Paltrow showing off her figure on the beach and surfing in the sea, instead of escaping from shark mouths. Such a change is unacceptable to little Gilbert no matter what. Paul Collins can accept the failure of Shark Beach because he is a veteran editor with seniority and experience. But little Gilbert couldn't accept it because it was the first film he started with. Once you fail, if you want to get the opportunity to direct again, I don't know when you will have to wait. That's why Gilbert Jr. dared to risk the world's condemnation and compete with Paul Collins for the editing rights. Anyway, the movie failed, and he doesn't know when he will have a chance after that, and he has no way back. At this time, if you look forward and backward for fear of offending people, you will not be able to do anything. It's better to rush and fight, grab the class and seize power. It's a big deal to fail and not be a director. Lao Tzu invests in an internet company. Soon, Gilbert Jr. and Paul Collins snatched the editing rights, and then the news that the two almost got into a fight in the editing room reached the top of the world. The director and the editor almost got into a fight because of an editing problem. Is this worth it? What does little Gilbert want to do? It's already very face-saving to involve him in the editing work. Does he want to go to heaven? So Lou Vasseur, vice president of Universal Pictures, called Gilbert Jr. and Paul Collins into the office to settle the conflict. The solution to the conflict is simple, that is, to get Gilbert Jr. to stop meddling in the editing work, and everything is based on the edited version of Paul Collins. But in the face of Lou Vasseur, who has the power to kill and kill the film, Gilbert Jr. will not back down at all. He had long known that Lou Vasseur was against the investment project of Shark Beach, and it was Akio Tani who insisted on the project. Akio Tani is working on Spielberg and Jurassic Park, which is currently the most important job for Universal Pictures. Mr. Vasseur, all the ideas for this project came from me, and I know best what the finished film should look like. When I was filming in Hawaii, I also exchanged ideas with Mr. Spielberg, and he agreed with me. I also gave Mr. Collins some pertinent advice, but he didn't listen at all, and only edited the film according to his own ideas. By doing so, he ruined the film. Gilbert Jr. spoke in an agitated tone and fiercely criticized Paul Collins. For Lou Vasseur, however, Paul Collins is the one he can trust. Lou Vasseur was still able to maintain a good demeanor and said to little Gilbert with a smile, "Little Gilbert, I can understand your feelings. But Paul is a senior editor in our company, and there are countless good films born from him, and we believe that he will cut a good film for us." Gilbert Jr. disagreed, and his rhetoric was still very vehement. "Mr. Vasseur, if you have seen Mr. Collins's cut, you will find that he cut a completely love movie, and it has nothing to do with the thriller shark film. The shark is the biggest selling point of our film, but Mr. Collins doesn't seem to care about the shark at all." Paul Collins said to little Gilbert in a mocking tone, "Little Gilbert, I've been in this business for so many years, and I know very well what the market likes to see." Little Gilbert immediately retorted, "If you understand the market, you won't be reduced to editing my film. You should edit Captain Hook, and in the future edit Jurassic Park." Paul Collins was so shocked by Gilbert Jr. that he almost didn't catch his breath. Gilbert Jr. didn't plan to let it go and continued to say to Lou Vasseur, "If Universal Pictures didn't trust my ability, they should have kicked me out of the director's position from the beginning of the film's project, or didn't let the project go on." But now that the project has been established, it proves that Universal Pictures still believes that this film has a certain future. This is a shark film produced by director Spielberg. Has Mr. Vassell forgotten the box office myth created by Jaws? Gilbert Jr.'s words reminded Lou Vasseur that the film was produced by Spielberg after all, and it was he who recommended Gilbert Jr. to Universal Pictures for editing. Combined with what Gilbert Jr. said earlier, he had an exchange with Spielberg, and Lou Vasseur had to consider whether Spielberg really agreed with little Gilbert's statement. Although Spielberg rarely asked about the project, the film was in post-production. Kicking out little Gilbert is equivalent to slapping Spielberg's face, and it is hard to guarantee that Spielberg will not think much about it. Many people are staring at the project Jurassic Park, and if Spielberg falls to another company with this project, it will be a huge loss for Universal Pictures. In front of the $62 million, Jurassic Park, Shark Beach seems so worthless. So Lou Vasseur felt that he couldn't afford to lose a big deal because of a small one, and he had to sweep away all the factors that were not conducive to Jurassic Park. So Lou Vasseur said, "That's better than this. I will suggest to the higher-ups that you two edit separately, and then come back to see the finished film and make a decision." In fact, this was a way to appease little Gilbert and get him not to get into trouble with Spielberg. In Lou Vasseur's opinion, a young director who is able to shoot Shark Beach has surprised him. How can he complete the post-editing work? When the time comes to make little Gilbert die, Universal Pictures still releases a Paul Collins cut. As for Gilbert Jr.'s version, it can be added when the tape is released, and the director's cut version can also add a selling point to the tape. For Gilbert Jr. and Paul Collins, this was an acceptable option for both of them, and they agreed. When he went out, Paul Collins taunted, "Boy, this line of water is very deep. Be careful that you are drowned, and you will not be able to see you in the future." Little Gilbert didn't expect that this American would use metaphorical ridicule, and he was quite literate. But he didn't give an inch and said in a choked voice, "You've been an editor for so many years, and that's it. Don't worry, I'm the one who is going to the top, and when the time comes, I will see you flooded. Maybe I pity you and throw you a survival ring." Without speculating for more than half a sentence, the two turned around and left, never exchanging a word again. A few days later, Universal Pictures sent a word for Gilbert Jr. and Paul Collins to edit a separate version. The two were able to work separately and never have to see that annoying face again. This was a pretty good opportunity for little Gilbert, who knew how to cut the film to look better. If the editing is good and successful, then it will be much less difficult for the next film to ask for the final editing rights. He also has to thank Spielberg for getting the opportunity to edit alone. If it weren't for Spielberg's tiger skin, he wouldn't have gotten this opportunity so easily. Borrowed someone's name, and it was not appropriate not to call and explain. And Universal Pictures will definitely inform Spielberg of the matter, and Spielberg will have a very bad impression of him at that time. "Hey, Jonathan, I'm little Gilbert. Is Uncle Steven here?" Little Gilbert dialed Spielberg's office. "He's here. Wait a minute, I'll transfer the call." "Okay, thank you." After waiting for a while, Spielberg's voice rang on the other end of the phone. "Hey, little Gilbert, what are you looking for me?" "Uncle Steven, it's like this," said Gilbert Jr., about the dispute with Paul Collins and finally the ruling of Lou Vasseur. "So that's the case, Lou has already told me." Spielberg was still a little happy to hear this. "You can take the initiative to tell me. It means that you are not carried away." "Little Gilbert, although it's true that you're for the movie, the most taboo in this industry is the person who breaks the rules of the game, you know? I know, I understand, it's all my fault, Uncle Stephen. Little Gilbert quickly admitted his mistake. Well, I'll get in touch with you. You buy something, go and apologize to Paul Collins, remember? Pretend to be some. I'll let Jonathan go with you, and Paul Collins won't dare to embarrass you with him, Spielberg said. Unexpectedly, for his own sake, Spielberg would actually sell a face to Paul Collins. Little Gilbert was a little moved. Thank you, Uncle Stephen. You're welcome. I'm also repaying your father's favor. Without him, I would have quit the film industry a long time ago. Spielberg said. This made little Gilbert wonder what the old man and Spielberg had in their early years. It seems that we will have to go back and ask the old man another day. Spielberg added, as for the editing work, since Universal Pictures has decided that you will cut a separate version, it is better to use this opportunity to prove your ability. Clear? Little Gilbert. Little Gilbert hastened to agree. I know. Thank you again, Uncle Stephen. Well, good. Go do it, young man. Spielberg looked satisfied and hung up. With Spielberg's support, Gilbert Jr. has no worries. Of course, such a deviant thing will eventually spread out and be known by all Hollywood. But what does it matter? Little Gilbert deeply knows that this is a circle of people who chase success. As long as you succeed, the previous wrong things will become the right things. If you fail, even decisions that seem wise before will look stupid. Although he asked himself to apologize to Paul Collins, Gilbert Jr. was a little reluctant. But this was Spielberg's assignment, and Gilbert Jr. still carried it out to the letter. As for Face or Something, before he became a big Hollywood man, Gilbert Jr. had already thrown his so-called face into the Pacific Ocean. If you mix this line, you have to be shameless. Paul Collins opened the door and saw little Gilbert standing in the doorway with a cigar and wine. Then little Gilbert shoved something into his arms and bowed 90 degrees, more than the standard Japanese president. I'm sorry, Mr. Collins, I was wrong before, and I beg your pardon for my reckless behavior, and forgive a young man's impulsiveness. Paul Collins thought the world was a little funny, and he had to die in front of him, cursing each other for drowning. Within a few days, he came to apologize. Paul Chris wanted to taunt him, but when he saw the man standing on the side, he instantly retracted his words. This person he still knows. It is Jonathan, the assistant next to director Spielberg. Send Jonathan. Spielberg's meaning is self-evident. Paul Collins took Gilbert Jr.'s things while speculating whether Spielberg was the illegitimate son of Spielberg and helping him so much. It's okay, little Gilbert, it's all about work, it's normal. Yes, Mr. Collins, it's all about work. The two shook hands enthusiastically, as if the previous quarrel did not exist, especially harmonious and friendly. After some hypocrisy, Paul Collins invited little Gilbert. Why don't you come in and sit? No, Mr. Collins, there's a lot of work to be done in the editing room, so I won't bother you, goodbye. With that, little Gilbert retreated. Jonathan on the side frowned. He didn't expect little Gilbert to be unforgiving in the end. It seems that he is indeed young and vigorous. After coming out, Gilbert Jr. thanked. Thank you, Jonathan. If you hadn't come, I would have fought Paul Collins. You're welcome. I'm just getting the job done. Jonathan thought about it for a while, but still said a few more words. Little Gilbert, words are sometimes the most powerless counterattack. You have to make real achievements, and at that time, no one can ignore you what you say. I remember, Jonathan, I'm going to treat you to dinner another day, to eat authentic Chinese food. Little Gilbert said he received. After seeing Jonathan leave, Gilbert Jr. returns to his apartment and begins to think about how to proceed with the editing. After a while, the call came, and it was Gwyneth Paltrow. I heard you had a conflict with the editor at Universal Pictures? Little Gilbert pretended to be surprised. You know all this, huh? That's... Gwyneth Paltrow on the other end of the line triumphantly said, I'm not only aware of this, I'm afraid it's all over Hollywood. Congratulations. Jokes. arrogance, and I don't know how high the sky is. There has never been a rookie director in Hollywood who has received such high attention and negative reviews. Little, Gilbert said nonchalantly, there is an old Chinese saying that if you have more lice, you won't itch, and if you have more debts, you won't have to worry. Anyway, it's already like this. Let them go. As long as the movie is successful, all doubts will dissipate. You're pretty open, Gwyneth Paltrow called, wanting to comfort little Gilbert, but he didn't need it at all. What have you been up to lately? Little Gilbert asked. Don't mention it. Gwyneth Paltrow began to complain. My father and my mother stared at me every day, told me to go to acting classes, to exercise, and I didn't even have a chance to sneak out to you. This is pretty good. Enrich yourself. Maybe you can win an Oscar in the future after practicing your acting skills. Little Gilbert laughed. If memory serves, Gwyneth Paltrow did win the actress in the future with The Love History of Samhain, and then was scolded as the most popular actress in history. Don't talk about this yet. How are you doing without me these days? Gwyneth Paltrow asked. What else? Little Gilbert tilted his head, although Gwyneth Paltrow on the other end of the line couldn't see it, and said in a mocking tone, I have a girlfriend. What? Did you have a girlfriend? Who is it? Does it look good with me? Are the legs as long as mine? Gwyneth Paltrow looked surprised and hurriedly asked. Not really, it's called Five-Fingered Girl. Little Gilbert's answer is very intriguing. What's the Five-Fingered Girl? Gwyneth Paltrow didn't understand it at all. It's my hand, stupid. Little Gilbert unraveled the puzzle. Gwyneth Paltrow on the other end of the phone was stunned. She didn't expect this to mean. After a while, she couldn't help but laugh and giggle, like a hen. I didn't expect you to have such a hard time without me, and I didn't think about finding other women. After Gwyneth Paltrow finished laughing, she said in a mysterious tone, It's also very uncomfortable to hold back like this, so I introduce my good friend to you. Good friends? Who is it? When the time comes, you'll know. My father is coming. I'm hanging up. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Little Gilbert hung up, shook his head, and then left Gwyneth Paltrow's best friend behind. This American chick is really good, and when she is idle, she calls him to ask if he is lonely. What is the situation of co-authoring the movie? She doesn't care at all. Unable to understand Gwyneth Paltrow's brain circuitry, Gilbert Jr. then continued to work.